Hello, my name is Nelson, and I'm going to be starting Group Three's mini presentation. For this research project, what we did was we took our research question of what are the staff management challenges, specifically in hiring, training, retaining, in virtual and in-person work environments during the COVID-19 pandemic, and what strategies were used to combat those challenges. We focus on 4 different types of organization within the public, private, governmental, and K through 12 sectors. Now, as part of our research, what we did is we conducted a total of 14 interviews. Each interview was asked a total of 9 questions that then were used as data to identify themes across all of these different types of organizations related to the hiring, training, and retaining process during the COVID pandemic. Each participant or each interviewee also participated in a survey that consisted of questions related to the research question. For example, what type of organization do you work for? This is how we were able to identify different types of organization and then evaluate how those themes were relatable, between different types of organizations. Another type of question that we asked in the surveys was if the organization experienced a high level of turnover during the pandemic. And finally, how were new staff members or new employees or new hires onboarded, considering that a lot of places were doing both in person and virtually, while others were just doing in person, or others were doing the onboarding process virtually. So we were able to identify 5 themes across different sectors of education: higher education, K through 12 education, both public and private. And in the next portion of our presentation, we're going to discuss what those themes were.
Hello, classmates. This is Lincoln Wolf, and I'm going to talk to you about the technology challenges identified in Group 3. Group 3 was representative of the private sector, higher education, K through 12 education, and public government sector. 3 central themes rose to the top across all of these entities. Training of staff was a major challenge across the board. Staff transitioning to the virtual environment, not familiar with technology, not familiar with what was needed to access their institutions or organizations remotely. Equipment, the purchase of technology needs, PCs, laptops, increased internet bandwidth that could support at-home work in the virtual environment was a challenge across the board as well. And then a major challenge, and one that took some time to work through, was IT support. Some organizations and entities had smaller IT departments that were more reactive and less proactive, and needed to be proactive in the virtual environment. And that was a major challenge across every sector: private sector, higher education, K through 12 education, and public government sector. And that sums up technology challenges.
Hello, for our research project, we did turnover and shortage of applicants, and we looked at 4 different types of organizations in the workforce. And so we looked at number 1, the private sector, number 2, higher education, number 3, K through 12 education, and number 4, public government. So the reasons for turnover and shortage of applicants in the private sector included small applicant pool due to the lack of full-time positions. Turnover was low, considering that it is rare for organizations to offer full-time positions to new hires. Number 2, for higher education, the reasons for turnover and shortage of applicants include higher turnover rate due to inexperienced, decline in applicants due to the increase of unemployment benefits such as payments and extensions, decline in applicants due to the institution mandates for vaccinations, and an increased stress on HR people, the systems, and the process, which led to delays in the hiring. Number 3, for K through 12 education, the reasons for turnover and shortage of applicants included fewer applicant pool, fear of infection due to personal health issues, eligible persons chose to retire. Maybe some of them were eligible to retire, some of them retired early. And then also there was a competition for applicants. And number 4, public government. Reasons for turnover and shortage of applicants included higher than normal turnover due to pandemic fears. And then applicants would not accept job offers due to in-person return to work environments. So when we looked at all of these 4 different types of organizations in the workforce, these were some of our findings in our data analysis.
Shifted standards of hiring process. Within the private sector, new hires were expected to work remotely and in person. The hiring process required candidates to be familiarized with the online resources. In the higher education setting, they were accepting inexperienced first-year degreed staff, bachelor degreed applicants to fill immediate positions. They counted any educational experience, not just higher education, and it changed up the hiring committee's makeup. In the K through 12 setting, they conducted interview cycles multiple times to find a good fit. They hired more individuals with less teaching experience, and they had to hire more substitutes because of the shortage. Within the public government sector, they had to downgrade open positions to fill them with less qualified applicants. Interviews were virtual and in-basket exercises were sent electronically to applicants, but worried that they were not the ones completing the exams. And they had to interview multiple times because of rejection of offers by other applicants.
Regarding the impact on building relationships and cultural integration, we found that across the 4 sectors, private, public, K-12, and higher education, there was a difficulty in fostering relationships. The inability to build relationships between experienced staff, new hires, and students negatively impacted campus culture integration.
As noted before, we are addressing the staff management challenges pertaining to training in a virtual and in-person or hybrid work environment in the midst of this pandemic that the private sector, higher education institutions, K through 12 education institutions, and the public government are facing today. So training in a pandemic environment, the private sector reports that they have reduced their number of faculty members, forced administration to ensure dual training for online and possibility of in-person training. Higher education states that training resources were not set up for a virtual platform and that IT was short-staffed and this delayed adequate training. They also report that over-reliance on virtual training left new staff unprepared and most of all, Zoom fatigue. K through 12 reports that they could not introduce point persons for information and training was more time consuming. Fear of technology proficiency was also noted in K through 12 education. For the public government, difficulty transitioning all classroom trainings to virtual engaging platforms and difficulty ensuring staff had media software for the virtual trainings, as well as difficulty in knowing whether staff were retaining virtual training material to apply in the field. These are the training issues faced with the pandemic environment.
In conclusion, there were 4 key themes that we noticed. 1, there were technology challenges. 2 out of 4 of the organizations we studied experienced difficulty in transitioning from in-person to virtual. Also, those within smaller organizations were forced into a virtual environment where they did not have all the resources needed. 2, there was turnover and shortages of applicants. A smaller application pool became the norm. And also, as people noticed the uncertainty of the pandemic, they either were leaving their roles or retiring. 3rd, it was much harder to create relationships and culture within the workforce. There were no longer these in-person extracurricular activities for people to be involved in, as well as there was no in-person introductions or interactions at all. In the K-12 space, there was a struggle to create school spirit as a result of the virtual environment. And lastly, training in the pandemic. As a result of moving to virtual from once in person, you could not effectively ensure that the trainings were being properly received and effective. Also, with the limited amount of time to ramp up, it was hard to create the materials for trainings. And lastly, many teachers experienced that they were struggling to make sure that they could keep up with the technology, and that was a major fear for them. All in all, we can see there were plenty of things that affected this pandemic and how we all integrated within it during our working times. So thank you so much for listening.